rum lovers, and welcome back to another episode of the Rumcast. As always, your hosts for today's show are myself, John Gulla, and Will Hookinga, and together we bring you this podcast that talks all things rum related with the people who love and shape it. Coming up on today's program is a very special interview with Mr. Jason Paul Cox, founder of Cañada and Alambique Serrano rums, and through the Spanish to English translation talents of Jason, we were also lucky enough to speak directly with Isidoro Krassel Jr., the eldest of the four Krassel brothers who produced the rums there in the Cañada region of Oaxaca in Mexico. So, Will, I know you've been wanting to talk with Jason for a while now. You've been talking about Alambique for a bit. I'm guessing you're pretty excited about this one.
I was super excited, John, just because ever since we did our Guide to Mexican Rum episode, at least a couple years ago now at this point, that in doing the research for that episode, that was actually the first time I found out about Cañada, which is sort of the unaged single mark, as Jason described it, product that they put out. And that was the first thing they started putting out. Mm-hmm. And I remember reaching out to Cañada via email just to try to get some details, and got in touch with Jason through that. And he had mentioned a year and a half ago at this point that he was working on another project, and, year and a half, 2 years goes by, and I start seeing all of these reviews pop up online for this new aged rum product out of Oaxaca called Alambique Serrano. And first you see blend 1. I was like, cool, there's this new thing. And then blend 2, then blend 3, then blend 4, then single barrel 1, single barrel 2. I was like, wow, these guys are doing a lot of stuff down there. And then at some point I connected the dots and realized this was also coming from the family that produces Cañada. And it was just like, man, this is a really cool thing. They have this unique kind of still that their family invented. It's in a different sort of region of Oaxaca, sort of. And I don't know, anytime we talk to these producers from this region, it's always so interesting to me. And so I was super, super excited. And then, of course, getting to try blend number 1, which is available in my local market here now, and realizing that the quality of what they were doing lived up to my hopes for what it could be, for their first product being out there in the wild. So yeah, I was super excited, and super fun to get to do an episode with a translation for the first time. That's a Rumcast first.
It is a Rumcast. I have to say, Will, so I like you, I actually am enjoying the Alambique sample as well and think that's good. But I had somehow, even despite our episode on Mexican rum, forgotten that Cañada was from the same producers as Alambique Serrano.
Oh, there's a lot of producers down there, and they're very distinct names, right? It's not like they're that close. Right,
and even the product, the way that they look. So I just hadn't remembered until I started researching for the interview again, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. They're doing both of those things. And I'm gonna give you this is my far too honest John take to start here.
Okay, some radical transparency to start the podcast.
Well, so when I looked at the Cañada product, I was kind of like, I didn't have quite the excitement level for that product in my head to start with. Okay. And that, I think, was really wrong of me, and I'm going to explain to you why.
All right.
So I was already like, well, Paranubes exists, right, from the Oaxaca region of Mexico. Dakabend exists from the Oaxaca region of Mexico. I like both of those. I know those. And even if you want to pull it out further in terms of Mexican rums like Charanda or Uruapan, which is in Michoacan, but still a Mexican unaged product. And I like all of those. And so somehow in my head, I just kind of lumped it in. And I feel like I can't be the only one to have that kind of thought. But
you
then
felt
I realized,
it sounds like you were kind of like, okay, I get it. I get this category. Is that kind of your approach to it? Yeah.
Right. Okay, got it. It's another, kind of product. And you can do this with many things. Like, okay, it's a Puerto Rican rum, something like that. But obviously that's glib, right? So I fought myself. I was going, wait a minute. And I started to think differently about it. And as we were talking with Jason and Isidoro, of course, the more and more I realized how freaking wrong that really is as a viewpoint, because it's not only the regions that are different, even amongst Oaxaca, but the processes that they're using and all of these different things that they are doing and variables that make this a distinct and unique expression even among that region.
I heard things, especially in our conversation with Isidoro, in terms of things they do in their production that I've never heard described from any other rum producer, not only in Oaxaca, but the rest of the world.
Right.
There's tons of really unique and interesting things they did because of the natural landscape and environment in which they make this product. And we get into a lot of those details. So yeah, and I think one of the coolest things about it also was, sometimes you talk to producers who are experimenters, who love to tinker and try different things. It's great to talk to producers that have been doing the same thing for a long time, and they know what
keeping
they make.
Keeping a tradition
and
alive, yes.
And the Krassels are keeping traditions alive in a lot of ways, but they are not bound by tradition. They are, the words muck pit came up in this interview.
That's right.
High ester came up in this interview. Cane syrup came up in this interview. Types of sugar that I've never even seen before. They showed us on the screen at one point. Yep. So they are doing a lot of really inventive, interesting stuff. And I feel like they've already released a lot of like the blends. If you look at the blend components of what they released through Alambique Serrano so far, they're very different and distinct. But I still feel like they've only shown the world a small sliver of what they're working on. So that's why that's what really excites me about this. And to give a little bit of setup of how, because I mentioned this is our first time doing an interview with a translation. So the way we set this up was we first did an interview with just Jason. And then about a week later, Jason was in Oaxaca and Isidoro was going to be nearby, and they got together. And we did a separate interview with Isidoro that Jason translated. And the way we were editing this together is we're using the first interview we did with Jason as kind of the I don't want to say foundation, but it's kind of the start and end point.
The lead in.
It's the lead in. It goes throughout the whole episode. And throughout that interview with Jason, we sprinkle in little bits that are relevant from our conversation with Isidoro, where he elaborates on certain things or includes stories from the family's history, because this is a history that genuinely goes back over 100 years to when their grandfather came to Mexico from Germany, actually, originally. Yeah. And it's a fascinating story, a multi-generation story. And I feel like in the genuine way, this isn't one of those like grandpa's recipe, marketing and, kind of stretch the truth back of the bottle tales. It feels very genuine to me. And so, I'm just excited for people to listen to it.
Same thing. I was fascinated by the amount of specific and unique kind of things that came up. You alluded to some of those already. So I'm excited for other people to hear this also. And I kind of came full circle on this. I've already ordered a bottle of Cañada. So
there you go.
I'm really into what they're doing. I really feel like it's super cool. And for rum geeks like us, you already mentioned, it doesn't get any better than like hearing some of the experimental stuff that they're trying down there and doing this stuff. It's super cool to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a column still they built and have designed themselves over the generations, starting with their grandfather. They've got pot stills there now. They're doing all sorts of really interesting stuff, a lot of interesting aging stuff now as well, which Jason was very forthcoming and like, hey, aging, I'm an agave spirits guy originally, and aging is like, with the mezcal he does through Cinco Sentidos, which is his brand there. That's like a no. So it's been a learning process for him as well, and it's cool to hear about that. Also, we had another first, thanks to you, John, which was a new product reveal that was a surprise even to the guest. John found something coming soon on the website that Jason didn't even know was on the website yet. So we got the first like Rumcast shock drop, new product
exclusive
intro. So that was really fun. I'm excited for people to hear that too.
Yeah. And an interesting one too, because the name of the product even, and I don't want to spoil it here, when it comes up, you'll hear more about it and you'll hear about that through the interview. So yeah, it's a fun one.
All right, well, I think we've talked enough, so we will hear from our sponsor of this episode quickly, and then we'll get right over to the interview, starting with Jason, and then when it transitions into parts from Isidoro, you'll hear a little. There will be a clues, a little music, a little transition from us, and you'll know what's happening.
High production values here at the Rumcast. Hey Rum fans, We may spend most of our time talking about rum here, but we also have a lot of love for other cane juice spirit categories as well, including cachaça. That's why we want to let you know about a new, high-quality cachaça recently made available in the U.S. market, Nossa. Nossa is a single estate cachaça from the rolling hills of the Minas Gerais region of Brazil, the cultural heartland of artisanal cachaça production. The cane juice is pressed on the same day it's hand cut, single distilled on site using a copper pot still, then rested in stainless steel before aging for a minimum of 24 months in first-use Amburana barrels that are native to Brazil. Now, I'm willing to bet that most of you are well aware of getting your hands on a good, no additives, 100% pure cane cachaça product here in the States, particularly those aged in Brazilian wood, can be really difficult. So we're excited to help spread the word that Nossa is now available for purchase online and can be shipped to just under 40 states. If you're newer to cachaça, Nossa serves as a great entry point to the wonderfully diverse realm of small batch cachaças in the Minas region. If you're more familiar with cachaça, you're going to love the vivid nose full of cinnamon and honey notes and the great balance of sweet and spice it brings on the palate. It reminds me a lot of the crumble topping on a Dutch apple pie. To learn more or to grab a bottle of your own, head on over to nossacachaça.com. That's www.nossacachaca.com and snag 10% off your order using the code RUMCAST. Oh, and don't forget to follow Nossa on Instagram for drink recipes, pictures of the fazenda, and a bunch more. Now back to the show.
All right, we are here with Jason Paul Cox, the man bringing in all sorts of cane juice rum from Oaxaca, releasing it under the brands Alambique Serrano and Cañada Rum. And we're both really excited because this feels kind of like we have this ongoing thread of episodes around Mexican cane juice rums. And I feel like this is part of that ever-expanding universe within the episodes of the Rumcast. So, and we started with Paranubes a few years ago, kept it going with Dakabend. We did a Guide to Mexican Rum episode a couple years ago. And that was actually where our paths first crossed, Jason, because I reached out to you around that time for some info about Cañada. And I went back and looked at the email today. And in that email response, you mentioned a forthcoming project from the same distillery. And so now, close to 2 years later, here we are able to talk all about that forthcoming project. That was kind of the impetus, because I was just telling you, I started seeing bottles showing up in my local market and reviews coming out and everything. So it's a really, I think Alambique Serrano is a super cool project, lots to dig into. So we're really excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. I'm very excited to participate with you guys. You know, I mentioned it before, but in as concisely as possible, I'm a huge fan, and that's sincere. So thanks for the work you guys do, and also thanks for the people who are listening and who want to, continue to learn about rum and appreciate it the way that you guys help promote it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all about the listeners. So I feel like I have sort of some of the dots of your backstory in the world of spirits, and I'd love if you could connect some of them for me. So I'll start with what I think I know, and you tell me where it's wrong or fill in the gaps. So my understanding is you go to Oaxaca for like about a month to study Spanish a little bit for the work that you're doing. You end up somehow in the restaurant business. You open a place called El Destilado, which I feel like I've heard so many people talk about El Destilado. I feel comfortable saying it kind of has like a legendary reputation amongst spirits nerds at this point. And then through that, you end up sourcing and bottling agave spirits under the Cinco Sentidos brand. And I'm assuming then that naturally leads one to discovering aguardiente de caña as well. So how close is that to accurate? What are the parts the parts of the dots that need to be connected? What are the gaps that you need to fill in there?
I am actually going to come back when this is recorded and write it down word for word, because I've never nailed the 30-second elevator pitch of my story. And this is exactly, it's concise and well said. That's exactly how it happened.
I'll give some credit to your partners at PM Spirits, because they have a page on their website about Cinco Sentidos, and that's basically I kind of cribbed that summary from that. That's what I gleaned from their kind of telling of your story. So a hat tip to the folks at PM Spirits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun to work with them too. I really am prone to rambling, as you guys will see here. So the host,
You're on the podcast for rambling.
Yes, this is a long format art, Jason. So you're good here. We're amongst friends. Wait, I have to hear. So what was the restaurant like? I just want to hear a little bit more about that before we jump into the rum side.
So El Destilado, it's a contemporary Mexican restaurant,
Okay.
and so basically working with as much as we can Oaxacan ingredients. And the idea being El Destilado, the distillate is the transformation or the creation or the refinement of a raw material. So I kind of missed the mark when we named that because people automatically assume it's just a bar. It's
Right.
actually, it has I'd like to say that I think it's a pretty solid bar program. But, the show, the star of the show there is our chef and our previous chefs as well, who've always kind of brought a sophisticated and innovative take on local ingredients. So it's a 72-seat spot, 36 seats downstairs, 36 seats upstairs, with a little rooftop terrace. We've got like a full dialed out 6 or 9 course tasting menu that's,
Nice.
I think, most satisfying gastronomic experiences in the country. And then we also kind of have a more casual menu for, tacos and tostadas, ceviches for the people who are looking for a cocktail and a bite and a snack.
Yeah.
So try to make good food and pair that with good, well-made spirits by people, mostly who I've had a chance to meet. So certainly trying to showcase some Cinco Sentidos and Alambique Serrano, but also other agave spirits projects that are exciting to me and some other eau de vie. And yeah, basically if it's a well-made spirit, we try to find a space for it on our bar.
You just put us both to shame with that pronunciation there, by the way. Alambique Serrano. That was really
Yeah.
good.
It's the sad thing is it's like everyone though. It's like I don't always hit it. Like I can't always roll the R, the R, the R, correct every time. So sometimes it gets stuck in the tongue, and you're like Alambique Serrano. I'm like
That's
damn,
basically Will every time. So just, you're good. Yeah.
I kind of
I'm more so at the point where I don't even try to roll the R's. Like if I'm in private, no one listening, I feel like I can do it, but I don't want to actually like put myself out there to do it in front of other people. So your bravery is inspiring, Jason.
I've got to say I'm also the 0 for 3 for making brand names that aren't at least a little confusing because we put the number 5 on the label.
Yeah.
So remember occasionally I'll meet someone who's a little uninitiated and they're like, oh, well, you're the 5 Sentidos guy.
5 Sentidos, yeah.
5 Sentidos.
Like, oh, no, man, because if you see a 5 in Mexico, you say cinco.
Yeah.
Right.
Where a home market is. So I was like, oh, I probably should have wrote that out. And then we went with Cañada, thinking, really, really trusting that our public, I don't know, that you guys also have an enye on your keyboards up there.
Yeah.
You had too much faith.
A lot is resting on that tilde. Yeah.
It's in the tilde. So we're gonna be. I think we're eventually gonna put our little tilde N hats out there. Really stress the enye.
Oh yeah, I
That would be
love
good.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. We're talking about restaurants and Cinco Sentidos. I have this bad habit because a couple years ago, my wife and I went to Barcelona, and there's a really good restaurant there that's actually by the same name, except it's written in Catalan. So it's called Cinc Sentits. But 5 senses is the translation. And so a lot of times I see Cinco Sentidos and I want to say Cinc Sentits, which is Catalan instead. But anyway, the restaurant sounds like if someone designed a restaurant in a lab for my sensibilities, I think it would be that restaurant. Like amazing locally crafted spirits and what looks from the pictures like insanely delicious Mexican cuisine is like so up my alley. So I've already been kicking myself for never having been to Oaxaca for many reasons, and that's chief among those reasons now. So yeah, John, we've got to make the trip happen at some point, I think.
Hey, when you guys make the on-site interview sometime to do it, out in the mountains, that this will be an obligatory stop for
Yes.
dinner.
Hell yes.
Yeah, we're always stuck here on Zoom. We need to get out there in the field. Well, okay, so we have the restaurant, the agave spirits. What was your first kind of encounter with cane juice spirits in Mexico? Like when did they first get on your radar? I'm curious if you remember sort of what the first ones were that you tried and kind of what led you in the direction of wanting to actually also get into the business of that.
Well, being exposed to them there was a large gap between being exposed to like Mexican cane spirits and then having an interest in actually getting involved with them. And we actually started working with the Krassel family's family brand, which is called MK, shortly after opening. When we're looking to build our cocktail menu around locally made spirits, but obviously not trying to just do mezcal only. We found that they had a pretty accessibly priced, 80 proof, serviceable rum for cocktails. And that's what we were using for a long time. And I didn't, to be totally frank with you, I had my head so far deep in the world of mezcal and agave spirits.
Yeah.
And I didn't give much thought to about where this is coming from, who makes it. It was kind of like, hey, it's Oaxacan. And that's like, and it tastes pretty good. So like, that's good at me right now. This isn't where my interest lies. And then I think about 3 years, one of the first people I ever met in Oaxaca was Judah Cooper behind Paranubes and Mezcal Lago.
Right.
And he certainly served as kind of a mentor for a while for me and my business partner at the restaurant. And if you guys have ever met Judah, anyone who has met him, he comes in like to the restaurant. He used to come in quite frequently and always sit at the back bar and have like a 12-course tasting menu to himself and just love it, just like enjoy life and always kind of have an interesting thing to tell. And, he for like 6 months, he's banding about this new project that he's excited about, but he can't tell anyone about. And like, you're gonna blow your mind, man, when you hear about it. And I'm like, dude, come on. And eventually, he shows up with Paranubes and says, this is what, I think this is the future for Mexican craft spirits. And it kind of set off a light bulb a little bit. It's like, wait a minute, I tasted it. I thought it was interesting. The photos he shared, the stories it's more than interesting. It's a really cool thing. Eventually, he invited me to go out and meet Jose Luis, the producer, and I were up there at one point, and I was like, cool, like this is totally fascinating, and it's way out of my wheelhouse. This is happening, oh man, like I said, I ramble. So like this is also happening right as we're trying to get Cinco Sentidos into the States, and fairly consistently being requested to make a more affordable price like mezcal for the well. And
yeah.
In a summary, I've never really agreed with well mezcal. The ecological footprint for mass produced agave spirits is quite horrendous. But when we're starting talking about competition in the market and the ability to actually fill up more than one pallet of a product and compete in that cocktail space, it was like, well, maybe this is a wise path to follow. So Judah was really forthcoming with like, these are some of the regions you should check out. I'm not gonna walk you to a new producer, but like these are areas that you should definitely try to visit. And he kind of set the map to a certain degree.
Wow.
And ironically, this all comes back. I started visiting. I actually had a chance to meet the Dakabend guys, and I met other producers in their village. And then one day, the guy who's dropping off Ron MK, the MK rum from the Krassel family, was like, hey, is there anyone else in your village that makes rum? And he's like, well, my family makes this. And I had never connected that the guy dropping off the rum was Isidoro, who you guys are going to talk to next week.
Ah, yeah.
Oh, like you are doing the self-distribution here. I thought you were a distributor or like someone that who drops off the Campari, drops off the Pago. Like it's not the guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's the intern. Yeah.
And he's like, if you ever want to come out, and check out what we're doing, feel free. And I had already kind of dipped, some exploratory trips in different regions, but I hadn't specifically been to Santa Maria Talistac. And so he coordinated a visit. And for me, I looked at it, as a visit, as like an educational thing. I brought our bar manager so they could come and see and learn about the products we're working with. And I left there with like the intention of like, wow, let's create something with this family. At that point, I think Isidoro and specifically Isidoro had known maybe more about what I was doing with Cinco Sentidos than I expected. And we tasted a bunch of things. He asked for feedback. They were kind of already working on an aguardiente profile thing that wasn't, quite to my liking. But at the end of the day, like they made it very clear that it's like, if you want to make rum with us, if you want us to create profiles, we can do it. And to continue this conversation, like this really long origin story, it was something that like comparing that with the world of working with mezcal producers, where oftentimes I'm very happy and proud of the people we work with, but looking for profiles is not on the table. There's no speak with anyone about like, what if it's higher ABV, or what if it had a bit more acidity, or like, how about playing with fermentation? Because these are techniques that have been inherited, sometimes 3, 4, up to 5 or 6 generations.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much conversation, like, I don't want to have the conversation of being like, I think you should change this.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
Hey, I think that most of the producers wouldn't even be interested in sustaining that conversation. And oftentimes there wasn't a need. There's never really a need to alter the product. But having Isidoro and his family say like, hey, we have we've played around. Like, we make tons of different profiles, and we make MK to satisfy a certain market with a certain profile, but like, we're interested in creating an aguardiente, and we've already made this. What do you think? To be invited to that conversation and start, participating was a whole new chapter in my exposure to spirits, essentially. So that's
like the dream, man. That's the dream. Is somebody comes, hey, we have this whole thing, and we just want you to come and help us play with this and find some great rum and some great aguardiente, right? That's fantastic.
It really like, and I think at this point I'd been in Oaxaca for 4 years, and sometimes I'm kind of in my own shell, kind of always looking at the ground in front of me, thinking about what's the next step for the mezcal and the restaurant. And to have them be like, hey, like, well, you're the guy we want to, like, we already know who you are. Like, we want to work with you on this. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like, but you guys are so talented,
Right.
That's awesome.
So it felt cool, I mean, and we certainly sipped and drank Paranubes and at a certain point and talked about the profile and the producers talking about their take on Jose Luis's fermentation and distillation run. And we could have conversations about what we wanted to create that wasn't that. Not to say, basically to say it's not a copy, but rather like we can make a spirit that's that can add to the conversation of Mexican spirits and create a different profile. And, I think we tried 3 or 4 different runs until we found the profile for Cañada. The rest they say is although it's not.
Now that you've heard how Jason came to be connected with Isidoro and the Krassel family, we also need to cover how the Krassel family became involved in aguardiente production in the first place. It's a story Isidoro shared with us that goes back over 100 years, and surprisingly, begins in Germany.
Él llegó a la región allá donde estamos en 1900.
So he arrived to the zone where my family lives today, in the Cañada, in 1938. That was in the Cañada region. According from what my grandma told me, he fled and arrived in Mexico in 1917. He was fleeing World War I.
Huyendo, ¿no? de la guerra. Llegando allá, él hacía trabajo.
Before arriving to the Cañada region in 1938, he was kind of doing some odd jobs, both working in the fields, working farmhand. And he would also do odd jobs like fix mechanical apparatuses, radios, stuff like that.
Radios antiguos, alguna. Sí, conocía de diversos.
So when he ended up arriving to Cañada in 1938, he, and to mention here for a second too, from again what my grandma had told me and what my dad has told me, he seemed to be knowledgeable about a variety of things, mechanical stuff, medicine, but again, arrived first as a kind of a laborer and then made his way to the region. When he arrived to the region where we're at today,
Santa María de Estad,
there was kind of like a not necessarily like a hacienda, but more of like a piece of property called El Condo. And at that point, there was kind of a local regional boss, if that makes sense, called El Cacique. It's a hard thing to explain. Like it is not a direct translation, but basically someone who was kind of a leader, but also who might rule an area with violence. That particular cacique had and it's different from everywhere we were at, but that cacique had cane, and he also had column-style stills that we think were of European origin.
Entonces él comenzó allá a trabajar con él, ¿no?
Basically, he was doing odd jobs with this cacique, and also the cacique had at that point, had some stills that were either kind of broken down or not fully functioning. So Max ends up buying Max, which is his name, ended up buying some of the pieces of the broken stills, eventually trying to get some lamins of copper himself and start creating his own still. It was also kind of a column still, much smaller than what the family used today and much smaller than what that local cacique was using. It was kind of his own design. Only about 25 centimeters diameter, 5 or 6 plates, But at that point, he started to experiment a little bit with distilling himself, with his own design still. From what Isidoro's grandma has told him, the belief is that we're not 100% sure if his family were distillers, but he was coming from a region where a lot of people were distilling in the region, and that might be part of the reason why we think he had initial knowledge of distillation in general. So, he was actually before he started doing this work before actually moving properly to Santa Maria Calixta. He lived in a neighboring town of Cucuy, and then rented a piece of land, and just kind of like with a small, basically like a hut, essentially, to install a little distillery. At that point, there were people who had small cane fields or small properties with cane that primarily they were using to create panela. And his grandfather became friends with people in the region, and eventually started, getting access to that cane and distilling it.
Al lado había un pequeño cañal que ocupaban para paneles.
So his and despite the fact that he was working with basically a smaller still made up of mostly recycled parts, quickly within the region he was kind of recognized for making a still that had a really high yield. So he was distilling to proof at about between 30 and 35 Cartier, which is 70 to 83% ABV, maybe 85%. And depending, of course, that no one was adjusting for temperature back then from the hydrometer. But and that was kind of the profile that he created too, and people were kind of impressed and surprised at his ability to get a good yield and something that high of ABV as well.
So this was the beginning of the legend of the Krassel still.
This is el inicio entonces de la leyenda del Alambique Krassel.
Así empezó.
Maybe it'll help us to kind of set the stage a little bit. You mentioned already Paranubes, and we've talked about Dakabend, and there's some other Oaxacan aguardiente and rums out there. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritties of some of this production stuff, of course. That's what we do. But maybe you can start by saying, what about the production process and the region there for Alambique and Cañada make it kind of unique, and where were you headed with that?
So for Cañada specifically, which is a single profile brand, a single mark brand, the still that the family essentially created, they engineered, it's their grandfather that designed this, is unlike any other still, not only in Oaxaca, but in the country. Like having this 8-plate, right? I mean, they can change the amount of plates, but this gravity-fed batch still is something that's quite typical compared to some of the stills that are being used in the Huautla region or the Mixteca region or in the Sierra Norte for production.
And that's the Krassel still, right?
Krassel still, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I love adding the name to it. It's like when people talk about the coffee still, There's the coffee still, and now there's the Krassel still.
Oh, and it's so funny. I mean, I don't know, funny, it's something because the first time we were at the distillery, there are photos, where there's signs that are like no photos. I think the family for a while wanted it still kind of a secret because of the way that they hear it. And it was like when we started talking about it, I was like, guys, this is part of the talking point. Like your grandpa invented a gravity fed still that kind of resembles like an Armagnac style still to a certain degree. No one else here around here does it. Like this is very special. And they have an immense amount of control on the still. I mean, because it's a batch still, it's basically how quickly they feed in their wash determines the ABV, and you can adjust on site, essentially the profile you're getting it and with a knob almost, versus, you've got the rest of the producers out here kind of distilling open flame and having heads, hearts, and tails. And, the cuts process, I think, is a little bit, people are obviously very talented at what they're doing, but it's a little bit less easy to control to a certain degree.
Naturally, we couldn't hear about this completely unique type of column still without asking Isidoro more about it too. He provided some great insight for all the column still skeptics out there.
Porque desde que se hizo el destinador, el alambique que hicimos siempre fue concentrar los sabores tanto primarios.
We've always tried to focus on
los secundarios,
primary and secondary flavors. Primary flavors being, the actual cane, the secondary flavor being the fermentation, and then calibrating our still in a way where those are essentially concentrates. Those are the primary and secondary flavors shine through quite clearly. A lot of times when you hear us talk about a column or hear the word column, they might think of something that's a lighter style or something that's a lot more alcohol forward or a little less character. But for us to be able to, to drink a spirit made in this type of column that we've made that reminds me exactly of the flavor of when I'm milling cane and juice blast hits you in the face, and aromatically it smells like the fermenting cane tank, is essentially, that's kind of the goal with that particular project. We've always been focused on and open to the idea of creating different profiles with the tools that we have. We like that column because in part it's efficient, it's fairly fast, but at the same time still lets us have raw material shine through. So I mean that's one. There still is huge. The cane variety they have up there is a little bit different than what you found in Huautla or the Sierra Sur region. So they're mostly using what people call Java, which is Java. It's a varietal that was introduced to Latin America in the early 1900s, and it's particularly well suited for the terrain where they're at. But if you go, the 40 miles over the mountains to where Paranubes is produced, that same cane varietal doesn't grow as hardy. It's a little bit shorter. Doesn't seem to apparently have the same amount of bricks content. So
by the way, for those like myself who are more ignorant of the region, when we're talking about the distances between some of these places, how far apart are we talking?
I'm gonna just to have the actually know the exact data, because sometimes I just say what I think it is, but computer right in front of me.
Give an approximation.
So as the crow flies, if I'm doing a decent job here of converting to a little scale on Google Maps, it looks like it's probably about 60 kilometers, 40 miles from Huautla area to Santa Maria Talistac. But Google clocks that as a 3.5 hour drive.
That was going to be my next question. Like, how long does it actually take you to get there? Yeah.
Oh, and Google doesn't know what the conditions of these roads are. It's
right.
3.5 hour drive. It's more likely a 4.5 or
Gotcha.
5.
Gotcha. And part of that is that can be the nature of mountainous terrain. I remember the last time I was in Puerto Rico, and you want to go to the center of the island, and you look at it on the map, and you're like, oh, it's super close. And then you get on a road that's twisting and turning and winding, and 30 mile an hour speed limit, and 3 hours later you're at your destination.
That's exactly what you'll see here. This little map that's mapped out. It's almost, I haven't done this visually in a long time, and it's just like you see the amount of that one takes to get from point A to point B. And I mean, they're even. When I drive out to the Cañada distillery, I always celebrate because there's a 2.5 hours into the strip. There's a straightaway that's like a kilometer long, and you're like,
floor it.
Yeah, exactly. That's finally semi that we've been stuck here for the past 4 years. So it's distance wise, it's not that far, but it's the other side of a mountain range. So I think there's a different language group, there's different food, there's a different culture specifically out one town to the next.
One thing I wanted to circle back to is, you mentioned you were buying the 80 proof kind of serviceable. It sounded like kind of like a well type rum. I'm imagining something not totally neutral, but closer to a neutral profile that fits in a lot of things and isn't going to like pop out and slap someone in the face. So was that like the sole thing that they were producing there before this whole partnership began? Or, you mentioned they like to experiment. So were they kind of doing some of this stuff? Because I feel like, when we talk to some of the other producers, a lot of times, like I think the Paranubes, for example, it's someone who had been making something a long time and kind of selling it around there locally and stuff. But this sounds different from that. But I'm not sure like how different it was and how much the experimentation kind of began when you arrived and how much it was already going on before and what all that looked like.
Well, in terms of experimentation, Isidoro is definitely the he can very specifically talk about like kind of the stages of that brand. But
Gotcha.
more, that's my understanding of it was, and it's been close to about 20 years now that the family brands exist. If I'm not mistaken, and this very, very well could be, but I know it's at least 12 years old. And it was something that when they started looking away from that local market, meaning like, we're selling this in plastic jugs to people, in an immediate radius, or sometimes, a few towns over, versus like we want to have a bottled product with a label and a name and an identity. and actually, in some like have a spot on the bar was pretty different than what most aguardiente producers were or are still doing today, where people are basically just making it only for local personal consumption. So the family had been doing that for a while, but they were crafting their 6-month age. I think it's a 2-year, and I think they have an 8-year rum too. I mean, that was more or less based on like the normativity of like specification. I think when they started the brand, they were a little bit more like, how do we fit the rules of rum in the country? Like kind of looking outside to say, how do we do the same thing? How do we fit into the box? Whereas what we're doing with Cañada and Alambique Serrano it's very much trying to get as far away from the box as possible to a certain degree.
And were they doing cane juice for all those other rums as well?
Yes, they were doing for the other rums. Historically, they've almost always just done cane juice. They also made and commercialized, a cane juice based vodka, which sounds like, heresy perhaps. But at the same time, it's kind of cool that it's a local product. It's like it's fulfilling a need to say that we're working with a local family and not shipping off money to brand X.
Sure.
That we can have a community impact the way that, they do. And they've been experimenting with a bit of whiskey too. So they were I think they started making their first whiskey right around the same time I met them. And I used to be scared of aged spirits. So I was like, I don't know what they do with that. Let's stick with them. But how things have changed.
So I've been reading about the production and the process that's being used there, and there's a few things that stuck out to me, and I'm sure, Will, you as well. And one of them that was just super cool and interesting to me that I have to ask you to extrapolate a little bit for me was this process where you cut the cane on the side of, the mountainside there. I forget the Spanish name for it right now, but you take it to the small trapiche, which is the mill, right? Mm-hmm. But this mill is a movable mill.
Yeah.
It's not a stationary mill. So you're literally moving this mill around to different hillside landings, and then it's piped into the distillery, in some cases over a mile away.
Yeah. This is so two things, right? The mill, it's actually, it's broken down piece by piece. So we were thinking about this the other day. We went up to check out a virgin cane site where they had a cane who hadn't had a previous harvest on. And it's a serious hike. And we get up there and the mill was still in pieces, And I was like, how long did it take to get up here? Because we just we're sweating. And they're like, oh, it was 9 mules made 3 trips each to bring all the together.
Wow.
And it'll take me, me being one of the older brothers saying it's going to take you about a day and a half to put back together.
Wow.
But you look at that and you go wow, that sounds like a whole lot of work. But and it is a lot of work. But once you actually set it up, and then you no longer have to take all these mules worth of cane all the way to the distillery through these pretty hard to navigate paths from point B. The idea of milling on site essentially is to not have to, take all these giant pieces of cane to the mill, but rather just mill right there and pipe the juice down. It's amazing. It's so cool. And especially now that I've got to know the lay of the land a lot more. It's been, at this point, we've visited them dozens and dozens of times and visited all the different plots of cane and have that relation to the distillery, which is strategically placed right below all their different properties where they can pipe here to here to here.
Yeah.
It feels, you look at it and you go, you couldn't have done it better. You couldn't have done it any better. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a marvel of engineering.
Just between that and the gravity stills, right? They're using the natural landscape to their advantage and the laws of nature.
Yeah.
You gotta tip your hat off to that for sure.
Yeah. That's kind of amazing. In some reason in my head, when I heard this story, I felt like there was somebody, either a mule or somebody had a backpack on with it strapped to them, and that they made the hike all in one piece with the mill on their back. But it's so interesting to hear that it's piece by piece and it takes so long to get that done. But it still seems.
I wasn't imagining taking it apart and putting it back together.
Right.
But then when you think about doing that once versus doing multiple loads of cane back and forth, it makes sense.
Right. Well, and you have the distinct benefit, Jason, right, of when you cut the cane right nearby, and then you get to mill it right there, as opposed to it taking 6 hours for the donkey to get back. Then you've got it even fresher, right? So it goes right into your fermentation tank.
Yeah. Yes and no. There is not that much emphasis on necessarily pressing right after cut. There's really, in fact, like Cañada, the profile of Cañada is about 48 hours after cut before it's pressed. Because no one's inoculating with the yeast, you're not really that concerned if there's a pre-ferment starting in the cane. You're not going to be fighting
Right.
an inoculated yeast. It's more of like, okay, like the native yeast from this cane can go ahead and get started before we press. And we found, like, at least when we were trying to make that profile, it's kind of an accident. But it was like, hey, like this 2-day-old cane, this 2-day-old cut cane gives us a profile that gives us a bit more, almost like a brandy-esque flavor to it, and a little bit of
Interesting.
word popping up on the fresher pressed cane juice runs that will do similar ABV. That frankly had a little bit more in common with some of the other people in our in our world of Oaxacan rum. I was like, what? Wait a minute. If we can, like, let's let this sit for a couple of days before we press. And the result of something that, in my eyes, came out just a little bit more divergent flavors, which was fun. So yes, I agree. It's like in theory, you could get the fresh cut from it, but for Cañada, we're not actually after that.
Yeah, but you have the choice, right? Which is cool in and of itself that you can do all of that. I wanted to ask a little bit more about another part of the process also that's kind of fascinating and you don't see it as much of. Some of your expressions are fermented in stainless steel and others are fermented in tanks made of pine wood. And then I know some of your blends ultimately can use both some of the time. So I wanted to ask you about the differences there and what that imparts in the final product and maybe how pronounced is the difference in terms of those two things.
So and this is a point to make too, that now we're talking specifically Alambique Serrano, which has been, if Cañada, the single mark brand where our intention is there things to always be between 53 and 55 and have a similar enough profile. Serrano has the idea is to make tasty rum with and learn. Getting installing.
I like that. Make tasty rum and learn.
That's like
That's
life
a good
goals
motto
right there. Yeah, that should be the motto on the. There you go.
My motto is drink tasty rum and learn. So it's just a little tweak. Yeah.
So Alambique Serrano specifically, to answer your question more directly about fermenting in pine tanks, and then also sometimes distilling in these little 250-liter copper pot stills versus Krassel column still. That's all essentially in the spirit of A, experimentation, but B, one of the brothers, Romel, really, he's someone who was like, I want to make rum that's a bit more rustic. The two younger brothers are usually doing Cañada. They're doing their own family brand stuff, and sometimes they make the cane vodka. And that Mel was like, I want to make whiskey and I want to make high ester rum and I want to have a fermenting room with pine tanks, just like my dad used to do it. And some of it's, I feel like, frankly, a nostalgia thing. It's just like, but it's both experimentation and like, let's do it like it used to be done. I've got to say, honestly, because the rum that Romel makes that's fermented in pine tanks is also pot still and usually distilled to a higher proof than the column still stuff. It's really hard for me to say, I think the fermentation tank makes a difference here versus the stainless steel.
Right.
Versus like, the process is totally different. The proof is different. The cuts are different. The still is fermentation.
You haven't isolated the variable there. Yeah.
Yeah, we really can't. We haven't yet isolated the variable. But it's neat because it's almost like a micro distillery inside of a micro distillery because like the big room where the column is, it's like 3 stories tall and you walk down a set of stairs, there's some barrels aging there and it's like, this is the contraption, this is the site. And then and down the hill, you've got these 4 little copper pot stills and like kind of a makeshift roof and then this little hut made from like cane fiber essentially. And that's the fermentation room. And it's like, this is like, it's almost like, it's like dad's workshop or whatever. It's like, this is like, like time to play around with the things over here. That feels very organic. And you look at it and you go, this could exist 50 years ago and you wouldn't know it the better.
Yeah. It sounds like a total free, like creative space. Like, each of the brothers even do what you want to do. Just go. We'll make it happen. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's super neat. And, but it is one of those things. And frankly, like, I'm not as probably privy to some of like the brother conversations they have, when I'm not around, when we talk about ideas. But like, I do find it interesting that like when we're purchasing rum, it's like they're like, hey, no, like I made this, versus like, oh, that one's Romo's batch. Like it's they work together very seamlessly, but also want to make sure that the distiller is recognized when they do something independent of the other.
When we talked to Isidoro, one of the things that we wanted to know about was at what point did he and his brothers transition into running rum production in this long history of their family and making aguardiente? And his answer gave really interesting insight into what it was like to harvest cane in different areas of the mountainside, the challenges that posed to fermentation, and the inventive solutions they came up with to solve those challenges, all at the ages of 16 or 17. So, since we just talked about harvesting and fermentation with Jason, now's a great time to transition over to this portion of our conversation with Isidoro.
Recuerdo más o menos de unos 16 años.
When we were 16 or 17, it was really when we started taking over being in charge of the distillery and the distillation. My father has a way of teaching, but also not being overbearing. So essentially giving you the tools to start doing the work. And, one day when we were setting up a new mill site, he just said, I'm not going to be there today. So when there was moving this mill up to the cut site in pieces, essentially, I remember looking at it and going, I know how this thing works, but I don't know how to put it together if it's in pieces. And my little brother Roman, he's just a year younger than I. He's really apt. He's really good at mechanical elements and kind of putting things together, like taking them apart, understanding how things function and work. With complete confidence, essentially just set it up. And we figured out how to put all the pieces together, and within a couple hours, we start milling cane. But I think at that point, it was a thing where he was teaching us. And without necessarily telling us what to do, we already knew how to do it. And you have to think back then too. It's we had people in our family that we employed who helped us, but at the same time we knew how to do everything. So an arriero doesn't show up, or rather an arriera, someone who is in charge of cutting cane and transporting cane when we cut the cane, and then we'll bundle the cane up and we'll put that on the mule's back. So it was a thing that we knew how to do and could do for ourselves. Our family that had 5 mules, so it wasn't our day-to-day task, but we could do it if we needed to. And it's really just step by step looking at everything. The probably one of the different things to learn about was just controlling fermentation, because we were working at distilleries, basically moving the still where we were harvesting. When we go to higher elevation areas where there's a lot of wind blowing, you would find, you would sometimes be colder temperatures, and we didn't quite understand, how to insulate a ferment. Because obviously, if you have sugarcane juice, it's only 3 or 4% ABV. When you distill it, you don't get anything from it.
Y ya platicando, estábamos nosotros ahí. Axel estaba más chico. Con Rommel estábamos platicando.
I remember really clearly, with my brother Rommel and my younger brother Axel, who at this point, was still pretty young, but we were recognizing that we had a problem with fermentation and temperature. And it was Axel who had that, I remember when Dad, sometimes when he wanted to insulate his ferment, he would wrap, gabazo, basically that milled cane fiber around the fermentation tanks to help kind of insulate them. So what we decided to do, if you think about what this palenque looked like, it was basically, 4 posts and a roof. So we decided to close it. We sort of decided to start making walls out of that gabazo and build that essentially all the way to the top. Leave very little space. That way it could both retain temperature. And, at that point, we didn't have internet, but at some point somewhere I had read about yeasts in a library. And my understanding was that yeast were something that are developed in sometimes darker and humid places. So our thinking to get this fermentation to take off at that high altitude, we would take some of the spent stillage, throw that on the ground, in this enclosed gabazo house where our fermentation tanks were at. And, you could see it almost as like a sauna, essentially heating the ground up, making it humid. And at that point, we knew how to more or less get a fermentation rolling at a place or an environment that may not really be favorable to ambient fermentation because of the weather. And as we, hop from palenque to palenque, essentially from cane field to cane field at different altitudes, to different climates, we kind of have a different formula as to how to get. We had a different formula as to how to get fermentation successful at different places.
Wow.
But that was we figured out on our own.
That's really fascinating. A couple questions have come to mind for me. One of which, one thing I was wondering from the beginning was the decision to kind of do Cañada and Alambique Serrano. I went for the R roll there. I don't think I did a great job, but I went for it at least.
I've heard worse. It's okay.
You did them as distinct brands. And Alambique is clearly more focused on aged products. I know you have some blends that also incorporate unaged rum as well. But I love doing multi-part questions. So part A of the question is, what led you to make the decision to do distinct brands as opposed to doing it all under one thing? And then B, and I think you were kind of getting into it there, but was this driven kind of by Rommel wanting to try things more in the aged vein? Because a lot of times we associate unaged products with Mexican spirits, right? Or lightly aged, I should say, if we're getting into the aged territory. But he's wanting to do whiskey. So I'm assuming maybe this came from him. Like, at what point were you like, hey, we should start maybe throwing some stuff in a barrel? And it just seems like it was a very intentional decision to do this separate, different thing. So how did that all come about?
I think that when we so I mean, because of the level of questions you guys asked here, like, and I love this because your other guests talk about the real stuff behind the scenes. So I'll tell you the real stuff behind the scenes as well, right? Like,
excellent.
Cañada really already exists before Alambique Serrano becomes a project or an idea, really.
Right.
A super long story compressed is that we had a lot of extra cañada that we didn't move because of the pandemic. So the natural thing was like, okay, we should cask it, right? Like this what we projected, what people were going to want isn't what it is, but the rum's made. So let's do rum, even though like at that point, frankly, I still probably didn't have much taste for aged spirits, coming from mezcal where like aged spirits is essentially heresy. I was like, I don't know if we're going to go that route, but like, what's the point of having rum sit in the little IBU? Like let's do something with it. And that kind of coincides with like two things. One, the brothers getting access to some more interesting cat that they discovered like through their pursuit of whiskey, and then the idea of installing a pot still. And Romo basically wanted a pot still, just one to start with, because you could experiment with things on a small scale, which is quite hard to do in a small column. So it's still a single fermentation tank, whether that be of a local fruit, and be on the lookout, or whether that be something, trying a different mash grain or mash build for whiskey that they're working on. It's just one little run, and then I can figure out what they taste like. So when he did the rum with that, and it was like, this is amazing. It's 68%. It takes 5 times as many man hours to make a liter, and it's not like Cañada. This can't be Cañada part 2,
Right.
Yeah.
But then it was like, cool, starting to taste this stuff, and then kind of really, buying into the idea of let's play around with different profiles and different casks. And there was a time where we still thought like, okay, Cañada, a brand that is somewhat established a little bit in some markets. We have the marketing, we have the website, we have the label design, but how are we going to do 60 versions of this label? You know what I mean? If we're really do single casks, this is not that you can really alter that much. So, you had mentioned that we emailed 2 years ago, and I was like, be on the lookout for a forthcoming project. It was about a year in 2 months to finally get the design we wanted from Alambique Serrano, which was like, let's have something, do a total explosion of colorful palette, to explain that.
You mean like this, right?
Yeah. And, and if you see these next to each other, the at this point, we've put out, or in the process of putting out 28 different single casks. And then we'll have 4 blends, and each one of these has a different image on the label, a different color scheme.
Yeah,
It should
that's
be
cool.
very obvious to the consumer that one bottle is not the same as the next. Get out of the what we're kind of limited by in the Cañada packaging, which is beautiful, but not as easy to just play around with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
yeah, and I really like the overall look and vibe of the bottles, and also like it's always fun. I mean, to some, this may strike some as a boring topic of conversation, but just like what you decide to put on the label, because as spirits nerds, we want so much stuff, but I feel like you really strike the right balance on the back of the label in terms of just the amount of details that are there. It tells a little bit about the fermentation, it breaks down the blend. Like I have blend number 1 here, which is, it's a column still and pot still blend, ex cognac and virgin French oak casks. That's all told on the front. Then you turn around to the back and you see the breakdown of the aging. So it's different amounts of aging, the pot still rum, 9 months in highly toasted French oak casks. Then this was actually interesting to me. I wanted to ask you about it. It also says rested 8 months in open top glass demijohns. And my first inclination was, I'm guessing when it got to the 9-month period, it was like, this is enough oak. Let's take this out and then set it aside until, we have what we want to combine it with. Is that kind of what happened? Or is the story different?
That is, no, that's 100% was the thinking there. It's like, this is not, we already in the world of, for Cinco Sentidos, we've got a pretty significant stock of glass demijohns to rest our mezcal in sometimes. Historically, we've seen that when we occasionally, and I know we're here talking about the mezcal, but
No, that's so feel free to mention the mezcal.
well, I mean, so for Cinco Sentidos, we really pride ourselves on being a non-intervention brand. So we're not doing the blending that we do in Alambique Serrano, but the one intervention we will do on some spirits that we get occasionally that we feel are a little rough around the edges is that we'll rest them in glass.
Rest,
for anywhere
okay,
from 6
got
months and a year or so. This is my first time, pulling casks, right? Like now for Alambique Serrano, and it's like, oh, like I'm scared. Like this is that particular cask was 68 or 69% ABV, and it's like I don't want to throw this in plastic in a non-temperature controlled room. Like that feels like that could really leach plastic, or even though it's supposed to be neutral and food grade, it's like I feel like that might degrade the quality of the spirit. So
Yeah.
put it in glass, but also like maybe some of the stuff that we have at this high proof that can be a little shocking, let those components burn off a little bit. We did have a significant amount of loss on any of the stuff that we put in glass that are open top. But what we gain in that process, like literally the liquid is evaporating and we are losing some ABV, just like as if it were, a normal cask aging process. But what you get in the result is something that's just a bit more unctuous, it's a bit more rounded. It feels way too drinkable for its proof, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like this is 55.6% ABV, and I think it drinks under that proof. It's really nice, especially for what's a younger age spirit in the bottle. By the way, I'd love for you to weigh in. This is like a conversation John and I have had back and forth 100 times, and I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. But it's like, so spirit goes into a barrel of wood. It's aged, right? Spirit goes into a glass container. As you were just saying, its character changes. It evaporates. You lose some of it. It's many of the same qualities, and yet we don't call that an aged spirit. Like when we're talking about the pot still rum in this blend, we say it aged for 9 months and the aging ceased. And you did include the information about rested 8 months, but it's just kind of interesting to think about how the world of spirits doesn't really consider stuff to be aged unless it's gone into wood. I don't know if you have any thoughts or feelings on that.
No, not really.
Next question. No.
Feelings, I don't know. But no, no, it's an interesting point. I don't know if I have anything to add. More than anything else, my mind went to, especially with those first labels, the first batches that we did, when you mentioned, when you read out the back that it's like, it's 9 months in a highly toasted French oak. I was stuff from like, because I didn't have like the aged spirits parlance under the belt yet. It's like, oh, like this is, no, who talks about it? I don't know. People don't talk about toast level of a barrel. They talk about a char level. But in Spanish, tostado, you know, so it's like at the West Day, you know, like toast is this. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that's the barrel text sheet that we have in Spanish. So this is my translation versus like what's commonly accepted. So I think that's what happened with resting in glass. We talk about reposado en vidrio and the world of metal, and it literally translates to we're resting it. You know, it's not we're not doing it. We're not altering it. We're just letting it take a little nap and wake up more something. You know, rest it. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, sometimes we see that language when talking, especially with cane juice producers, because I know there are some rum agricole producers who, you know, will rest spirit for months on end. I've talked to molasses rum producers that do the same thing as well, but I do think that's like, I don't know, I think sometimes producers are resting things and not communicating that, and I feel like it needs to be communicated because there's a reason they do it, right? The spirit changes. It's not just staying the same.
I mean, but hand with we're talking about packaging though, and you mentioning kind of how we do the label, and I will say that, like, I mean, granted, this I could be alienating, you know, people whose work I'm a fan of to a certain degree, but in my exploration of global rum now, which is really, I'm like, this is my thing now. I'm excited about it. Like to taste whatever I can get my hands on when I'm in the States.
Same.
It can be exactly. But you know, it's sometimes I see some like something that's really exciting and it tastes incredible, and I look at the package and like the how many years it's spent in a barrel is very prominent, and then like where it was made is prominent, and then there's that and a label. And you know what, I'm gonna look for it anyways. But I'm gonna look it up on the
not everyone
side, but I look at this and you go, man, like I sure would, like I can understand if you tell me how it's made, I know what you mean. So why don't you share that information?
Yeah,
I don't think you have much to lose but when you explain what your components of a blend are. It's not like anyone can replicate that. Just because brand B did this 80-20 doesn't mean you can do the same thing and have the same results. I don't know if people are forthcoming about it or not. If people feel it's proprietary, but it at least for me, it's like, man, I just want to learn as much as possible. Share us the deed, you know?
Yeah, we need the deets. I think there's an element of also, especially if you're talking about brands that are owned by larger companies, I think like the more layers of marketing departments and people there are, the more text will be killed on stuff. There will just be someone be like, yeah, can we just like get a little less text there and like make it simpler, that kind of thing. So I think that's groups. There's some committee thinking at play with some of that stuff.
What if we took away all the tech information and said that it's great granddad's recipe?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah.
I know you've got the blend components here, but what if we took this away and in a much larger font said that it was gluten-free? Like, you know.
We'll just throw a random number on there too, just, you know, just to see what happens.
Okay, we can't use frustration then. Okay.
Talking, Jason, about barrel aging, I did read a little bit that you kind of have two different areas to age in. One is the dry climate and then the humid climate. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about that, where the decision is made as to which place it goes, and then what are the differences in the end of that, in the end product.
You know, I think the first, this doesn't, again, you know, this is how the sausage is made. When we started with this, there was a bit of like, we're aging a certain profile at a certain place, which is mostly Cañada, like Krassel still, Cañada style rum at the distillery. Or we were doing it because that aging facility is larger, it has more space, and more of that rum is produced from a single batch, usually. And then the pot still rum, we've mostly been aging in this dry warehouse that's about 30 minutes outside of Oaxaca City. And because it's a 5.5 hour drive from the distillery, it kind of, to us, it made more sense to bring the smaller batch stuff to an off-site location to age. On hindsight, I really wish that we had done 50-50. You know, like it's like, oh, let's take Cañada and dry age it versus the humid climate aging. And that's kind of what we're getting into now that we've created blends and we've released single casks, and we're learning more about our variables and our components and how things are reacting from place A to place B, and go, cool, like we're understanding how things are tasting now with certain time at a certain place. So now we should have the liberty to change some of the elements and variables too for the next chapters, as we go forward, not only for, as a brand, but just as people who are engaged in learning about the processes and what happens with aging. So again, I'm reticent to say that, like, because I've never taken the same juice and put half of it in the dry warehouse versus half in the humid climate, I can't tell you 100% what the changes are. It's been two different profiles in two different places. But the dry warehouse, I mean, the humidity there is between 16% up to 40%. And on the occasional rain that we get in that area, it's like if I've had the opportunity to taste from a barrel 1 week and then it rains 3 days, I want to run out and try it again. And like to actually note that, like, whoa, like this is presenting totally different, after 3 deluges of rain versus a normal week, you wouldn't see such a drastic change in aromatics or flavor profile or texture. Those are the barrels I get to taste the most because they're closer to me, and I've been tracking them since they didn't even have a color. And being able to pull those out, between two times a month usually after a certain point, and watch the evolution, you just go, wow, I think the climate here obviously has a huge impact on what's happening with the contraction and expansion of the wood, and rains that kind of just add a component occasionally that sometimes disappears in the rum too after time. So I don't know. That's a ramble. I don't think I answered your question 100%. I wish that I knew more.
Well, you're kind of in the process, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying and admitting and saying, look, we're still experimenting. I mean, we started talking about how the Krassel family and you're experimenting with all of these different variables. And I think you already come to what we think is a great product that you put out. And there's more to come, which is exciting. Well, it
really is, and I think it's one of these things too, where some of this stuff. I mean, I don't know. You guys obviously get to taste a lot of rum and a lot of spirits. I imagine you have a good amount of access to stuff, but also your personal journey in tasting. I really struggle sometimes with tasting notes or to talk about how things are technically, as opposed to just a feeling, and then sometimes associated with that drinking at a time. So it's like when I look at my notes on these casks, like I would be embarrassed to share them sometimes, you know what I mean? Like that's not a taste, Jason, you know what I mean? Like, but it's just, it's more of a feeling. It's more of a thing about how do my organism respond to this, and what do I
I feel like we all have our own inner vocabularies of how we talk about spirits in our own heads, and a lot of times I find myself in that situation where it's like I have my dumb internal will vocabulary for what this is presenting to me, but I need to find a way to translate that to describe it. We're going to talk about it on an episode or something, but I think you're totally right. And I think this is one of the cool things about really getting into it with producers that are young and trying things for the first time. Like Alambique Serrano is at the beginning of its journey. I mean, this is blend number 1, it says on the bottle right here. And you guys have all these different variables you're working with. And I can look at this as a huge spirits nerd and realize that like this isn't like this is an end product, and it's a really good end product, but like it's not the final step of the journey either. It's like getting to it's almost like getting to peek into the warehouse a little bit at like what they've got going on right now, because I'm sure you would say like we haven't perfected any of this yet. We're still figuring it all out, and that's a much different and exciting proposition than getting to try rum that's been made by a producer that's been doing it that way for decades and decades, which is also very cool in its own right. But it's also great to get to hear a little bit about like, why did you guys do this? And like in the early stages, a lot of times it's like, well, the natural constraints and like necessity dictated that we put some casks here and some casks here. And like, 40 years from now, when people hear that story, they're like, oh, that's so cool. But in the moment, it's just kind of like what you had to do, right? So I think it's really cool to get to, as a rum consumer, to get to buy bottles like this in a producer's early days. And I know the Krassels have been doing this for a long time, but this is kind of like a new sort of venture for them. So getting to it's almost like getting the demo of the band, that ends up becoming like a huge hit or something, where this is like before it was cool,
Exactly.
So it's a neat experience.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I agree with you. And I've got to be frank too. It's like, at the risk of, there's still probably some blend one on shelves out there. And the other two blends that we just brought to market, which I think maybe landed 8 months after the first blends did, they're apples and oranges, right? I mean, they're not the same. It's very hard to say one is quote unquote better than the other. But in terms of what we just brought out with more experience blending, with more casks that have asks, that have come to age to start playing with, like actually me myself in terms of like trying to create blend and having a protocol and a procedure to go through now versus like the first couple that were a little willy-nilly, to be frank. Basically the point is that like I think we're just going to get better and better because if you compare blend 3 and blend 4 with blend 1 and blend 2, blend 3 and blend 4 have a lot more to say. I think there's more to pack. They're more nuanced. Blend 1's a really beautiful rum that I think you can sip on it, and after your third or fourth sip, you might be unconsciously sipping it. It's like easy.
That's literally happening to me throughout this interview. Like I already poured a refill, and I'm just like, I'm just knocking it back at this point.
It's a session rum, as Ian Burrell would say.
112 proof session rum.
112 proof session rum.
That feels like an accomplishment, but I promise you cannot sip unconsciously the Mata Diablos, which is blend number 3, or Tres Maderas blend number 4, because they are rums that they never turn the volume down.
All right,
which is pretty cool. Like that's a fun thing to be a part of now too.
Wait, so you mentioned you have much more of like a procedural approach to blending now. Like what is your approach? How do you go about it?
Some of it's mathematical because we're looking at, occasionally we're looking at casks that are, at least starting the brand. I don't think we'll continue this for much longer, but starting the brand, we were offering, single cask options to certain partners, and to make it an easier for them, we just do half a cask. Then I go, okay, well, I keep half that cask, and then that later, that's not a problem. So you kind of have your version of this cask, and then I'll take mine and make something new with it. So now working with that, it's kind of like, I think at any time, I think probably I've got 22 or 24 of those casks that I can work with that are restrained by a certain number of liters available. See how the profiles work first, to build like a micro blend between 2 or 3 of those casks, and then try to find another contrasting element from different casks that have been aged a different way to build a blend or a balance. When we did blend 1 and blend 2, it was a lot of like, okay, like we've got to start moving inventory a little bit. And like, I guess I didn't have as many variables to play with. So I thought that we put out blends that were as good as we could get with what we had. But I don't think that I ruminated on it as much. I didn't shoot, but I wasn't like, damn it, it's not right. Which is what, the process of 3, 4, and what, 5, 6, and 7 on the way are have been a lot more, because I have the ability. I think now I have the palate to know how to tweak, and I have the ability to add and mix and match a little bit more. It was very funny when I had this, like, pardon me again, I'm not sure if funny is the right word, but when we saw people have a really positive response to blend 1 and blend 2, and NPM spirits sell through their stock maybe a lot faster than we had forecasted. Talking with Nicholas Palazzi, it was like, hey, like, I guess I've got a blend, like, now. Like, we gotta, like, could you give me some advice in terms of what should I be looking for, what should I be trying to achieve, and what are ideal volumes and stuff. And if you guys ever had a chance to talk to him, you should if you haven't yet. He's I can't imitate him, but if you've heard, it's he sounds like a French dude, and he's sometimes very absolutist about things. Like when he says something and it's presented as a fact, you're like, that's undeniable.
Of course, yeah,
And just on a phone call to me, he's just like, Jason, you have to make something that is completely different than the first two. And it was, oh, like you're right, but like that's intimidating, but
Yeah.
walk into it and go, yeah, like what can I show from what we have that gives you a different experience versus a blend one and blend two. I don't know. It made me look at the process a little bit different. Like, what else can we create that continues to add to the narrative as opposed to tell the same story slightly different, which could have been an option too. You know what I mean? We could have just looked for some more really friendly, brandy influenced, chocolatey, sessionable, quaffable rums and called it a day. But this particular process to make the next two ones was a lot more like, let's really change what we're offering people and then see what happens.
You've certainly got enough different type of unique elements in there to keep doing that. And I wanted to, before we get too far away from all of those, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the cane varietals. You mentioned you're using the Java or the Java cane. Are you also doing other cane varietals as well?
No, not yet. There's something that we've talked about in terms of like things that we're trying to do as a brand. Again, being fairly new, the first obvious thing is like, oh, let's try to get our hands on different types of cask. Let's
Mm-hmm.
The conversation's been around a little bit to dedicating, a couple parcels to different varieties. There are other varieties that grow in that village, but they tend not to be great for rum production. So, there's one that's called Sangre de Toro, which translates to bull's blood.
Bull's blood, yeah. I got you.
Has like a super high, it's higher than the Java Brix content, but is so hard that sometimes it will break the mill if they're trying to crush.
Wow.
So it's like, well, not an option, even though that's something that feels unique here. It's like it's technically too challenging to produce without getting new equipment. And then I know that they've tried a couple of like a different, like a Criolla style cane variety, a bit more common in Outla. People tend to use that for panela in the region. It's good for sugar extraction, like for actually boiling down and making, like the panela, piloncillo. And their experience with farming it, they don't necessarily have land that's super suitable for it. It requires a bit more attention to detail, a bit more weeding, doesn't grow as much, blows over and breaks easier on some of the higher winds that they can get off kind of growing in the side of a mountain. So
right.
The idea that we've talked about is like trying to find a flatter piece of land, which isn't as easy as you might think in that village, to do a little hectare or half hectare, but it hasn't been prioritized yet necessarily.
And the other variable that you have there is you're between 700 and 1,200 meters above sea level, right? Which is a pretty decent range of different heights. And I don't know if there's the idea of microclimates there, or if you're still kind of even experimenting with that or noticing any differences in the cane in height also. But I imagine at least it's come up. Yeah.
Time to maturation is longer at the higher altitude you go, and also bricks tend to drop. So I think that I feel like we haven't necessarily isolated this as much as maybe we should, or as I would like to, in terms of experimenting with the profiles. Particularly when that stuff is specifically going into Cañada, it's like, oh, okay, if it's a lower bricks cane juice, it might require a little bit longer fermentation time, or we might have to just change the way to distill a little bit to try to hit the 53 to 55% ABV goal. It's almost like trying to control that element as opposed to embrace the differences, if that makes sense. But that's more for Cañada. I think for Alambique, we could certainly play with that more. What we have been playing with, though, is rehydrated cane syrup. So we've done a few batches of rehydrated cane syrup rum, which gives us a totally different texture and aromatic profile. That was something that was inspired by sharing a bottle of Le Rocher with the brothers a couple years ago. We're like, wait a minute, like, what's the process here? So
when you say rehydrated cane syrup, can you explain what that means?
So basically, taking your cane juice, boiling it down to kind of a sludgier component. It's first boil run. Basically letting that sit until you're ready for it in tanks, and then adding it to fermentation.
Because that stabilizes it somewhat, right?
It's been stabilized. If you boil it off, anything, a place for yeast to take over at, or where yeast could be active or start fermenting. And then basically putting that in your fermentation tank and then adding warm water to the tank and rehydrating the syrup, I guess, to a certain degree, and using that as your mash, your fermentable mash. sometimes I'm not great at explaining things that I can visualize quite well. I was like, show you. At the end of the day, it's cane honey or cane syrup.
Yeah.
And it's given us given us some rums with a very different profile. That's been very fun. We've tried some prolonged fermentation, higher ester rums that, frankly, are quite challenging to make in a large scale. So we're going to work those in blends in the future. We probably won't age them as much as use them as an ingredient for future blends. So those are the two that I think are variables that we have with cane right now. And I think we're definitely thinking about a little muck pit someday too.
Oh, hey. Obviously, we couldn't hear terms like muck pit and high ester without asking Isidoro for more details. He was happy to oblige, along with some thoughts on some of the other interesting ideas the Krassel brothers are currently testing out.
De hecho, sí, nosotros es como, bueno, al menos para mí, y luego lo digo con mis hermanos, lo que es Cañada y Alambique Serrano es algo de...
The idea that these projects of Cañada and Alambique Serrano, for us, I mean, again, we do make other products, and Cañada and Alambique is creating flavors that tend to be have more depth and be more intense. And something that not necessarily has the same commercial goals as some of the other things that we make. So it's to create something, for example, sometimes we'll make a batch and get excited about making a prolonged fermentation, a long, slow fermentation batch that is going to make high esters. And we make it, we taste it, we go, and we know it's different, we know it's special, and then amongst ourselves, it's like, well, Jason's gonna like this, and then when he's in the distillery, you'll have a chance to check it out. But even right now, like with this kind of this opportunity to create new things and be engaged in the process.
Y ahora el otro día que me dice esta de Hamden, estaba yo leyendo, ¿no? Cómo hace estas cuestiones también de tiempo.
We have the Hampton box too, right? I mean, that was something I gifted them a few months ago.
Very cool.
And he's like, when we look at this and we taste it, and you go, and you have the muck process, and I'm just hearing about this personally. Jason's just hearing about this. Like he was like, oh, my brother already made a muck pit, like as a trial, But the way that we're doing it is also our way.
Yeah.
Roman, who even though he's younger than me, actually started working with my dad a little bit at a younger age. So he was the person to remember that many years ago, if they were receiving water, but they didn't have a receptacle for the water, sometimes they would dig a pit and line the pit with the mash from the cane, and that mash from the cane is essentially impermeable. He was like, so between the two brothers, they're communicating about, really, you're going to just put cane there? Is it not going to evaporate or seep into the actual earth? And he's like, no, we tried this.
Wow.
We used this way with water, so it's true now.
Sí, pues ahorita lo que estamos viendo algo que sí nos mueve bastante y nos causa es estos drones de altos.
I think for me and my brothers right now, what still really moves us a lot is the high ester experiments we're doing. The idea of just watching the interaction, especially from one batch to the next, the way in fermentation process where you have, your alcohols interacting with your acids to create
Se produce estos ésteres aromáticos.
these aromatic compounds and aromatic esters that are incredible, and anyone else in the region, also, or my dad's eyes or my uncle's eyes, this is something that's unthinkable, to let a fermenting tank go for so long. Someone would say that that's just going to turn to acidic, or it might turn, vinegary, or you're going to lose your yield, or that, frankly, that's unworkable, that's unachievable. What you have from your ferment doesn't have any value at this point because you let it go too long. For us to be able to basically play that way, to start making these new things and learn that the process still has us really quite excited.
Viendo también en la cueva esa de agua de mezcal, 15 metros también es.
So this is the two things. The other thing we're excited about is this aging cave. It's on a property that they just started doing cane harvest from. It was a virgin piece of land, and there's a cave that's about 15 meters, about 45 feet in ground. That his brother is conditioning to turn into an aging area. So, climb down with the ladder and pull up from the barrel there. So that's exciting. And then apart from that, as brothers, we're really always excited about seeing what people used to do in the past, traditions that have kind of been lost, but how can we incorporate them in the future? So going back to this idea of the muck pit, people weren't making muck back then, but people back in the day were using these holes. They were digging the holes and lighting them sometimes with the cane fiber, and they would keep their fermented tepache there. They would always be under, close to banana trees. It was always somewhere that was almost climate controlled to a certain degree, where it was always a bit cooler, a bit fresher. Or basically around the foliage, what you have around you kind of made that small little area like its own unique microclimate. So to see people do that in the past and have their reasons to do it, and then look at it for our purposes today, because at the end of the day, these projects at Cañada and Alambique Serrano are creating new flavors, and it's like now we can apply old techniques for new purposes, and then see what it tastes like.
I know we're kind of winding down here, but I can't let you get out of here before we talk about this. So I saw on the website this product that you have called Cartier 30, which is...
is that live now, huh? Okay.
An unaged cane juice product that is 70% ABV.
Yeah.
Right? And I know it has something to do with the Cartier scale, and I wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit more about that. And, is that something that's going to make its way over the border to the U.S. at some point as well?
I love the that's live reaction.
Yeah, Jason, your face says it all right now. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah. Well, fortunately this is not a live podcast.
It is not a live podcast.
It is not.
Well, we are taping this. We are taping this on May 30th. I'm not sure how long it turns around, but this is actually inbounding now to PM Spirits in New Jersey. So I imagine that by the time this is put out, it should probably be available at like one store. But the Cartier 30, you nailed it in terms of the relationship to the Cartier scale. For those of the who are not that familiar with Cartier scale, it's kind of like it's an alternative measure. It sounds weird, right? Like an alternative fact. Just that we have three ways to measure temperature.
Right.
There's also, for some reason, there's more than one way to measure alcohol content of something. So we use the Gay-Lussac scale, which is 0 to 100, and it's a percentage, the relationship to alcohol versus water. But there's the Cartier scale, which I think has fallen out of favor everywhere for a long time. I quite frankly don't know. Like, I've tried to read about what this is measuring, and I believe it has something to do with the gravity of a spirit. But essentially, you are rating this, like, the ABV, or rather the degrees of the spirit, on a scale that goes from, I want to say it starts at 8 and goes to 40, and like 40% ABV, or like Cartier is 100% on the Gay-Lussac scale. 22 is around 47-48% Gay-Lussac scale, which is what we use. So Cartier 30 is about 70-71% on the Gay-Lussac scale. The reason that we are doing this little mark of Cartier 30 is because that is what people used to specifically call and drink in the village in the 60s, 70s, and up into the early 80s. And those were the hydrometers that people had access to. So people would refer to the ABV of a spirit kind of like as if we're referring to the temperature in Celsius as opposed to Fahrenheit. It was just, I think,
right.
Good.
So people would say, yo quiero un aguardiente de 30, and that roughly means 70% ABV rum. Or like, I like my aguardiente 22, which is closer to, again, 47, 48, or 23, which is kind of where Cañada's at almost. And that was kind of a way that people would talk about what a local mark was. What's the ABV? And, the ABV, essentially the profile goes along with ABV, depending on how you're operating that still. This was like a story that the Krassels had shared with me at one point, and it was kind of like, so do you guys like still make it? And they're like, well, no, like no one really drinks that anymore. It's like, but how to make it? And they're like, well, yeah. I was like, cool, let's try that. Yeah, that's what we're gonna bring out. It's gonna be it's pretty wild. You guys will taste it eventually. I wish that I could give you a better tasting notes about it, but it does feel a little bit more. It feels a little more grassy. It feels a little more unhinged. It feels a little more. It feels.
Unhinged.
I love that.
It feels pretty damn wild.
That'll sell it right there. That's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's fun. You know, I don't really know how people are really gonna watch or not, but it's
I can guarantee you there's a bunch of people listening to this
Yep.
episode right now who are being like, that is the thing I am most interested in now.
Yep, they're literally Googling it right now to try to find it. Absolutely.
well, apparently it's on the website. So
Wait, John, where did you find this? Because I've looked at I didn't see this on the website at all.
I mean, yeah, it was right there. I didn't do anything special. It was just it was the bottom one on the list of you had the blends, the single casks, and then there's this Cartier 30 with the bottle there and everything.
Oh yeah, I
Like,
see it now.
I don't
Okay.
think it was like literally yesterday. It's the guy who helps with our website is a good friend named Bill Bahan. He does some design for PM in house, and he did the design for the Cartier 30 label. I
I
cool
love it, by
label.
the way.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
a cool
just
label.
now seeing it. It's got the little airplane that I've read the story of on the website.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk to Isidoro about that, but the website's great, by the way. So shout out to the designer you mentioned and you guys for having the vision to actually have a website that is informative and easy to navigate. It's really nice.
Agreed. And see, Will, I do my research.
Yeah, you do.
So,
You found the Cartier 30.
the hidden. It's cool. It's funny though. It's I mean, I guess Bill is in the loop that like this is gonna drop any day. So I think he just went to the website with like, let's make it fun.
It's a shock drop.
yeah.
It's a
He's
shock
like,
drop.
Bill's going on vacation next week, and he had to get that in. So he's
Well, thank you, Bill. We did I think the one especially with PM Spirits is really always floored with the designs he comes up with. So I was really impressed with this incorporating the family plane and
Yeah.
this is it's the the time part of our history where these guys were making Cartier 30 in the 70s, when the family was flying around in the little two-prop, or this little Cessna, basically doing aguardiente drops. So like, it kind of made sense to pair that image, something from that family's history with.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's
Great. A flyby with your rum, kind of throwing it out the window. Shoo.
I mean, can you imagine so really context here is that like we're talking about villages that didn't even have a road built until 1987 or 89. There was electricity until the late 80s as well. And so essentially everything was hiking, and the Krassel family acquired a plane in the 70s and started an idle taxi business. So they would, shuttle people from one place to the next, any village that could clear a runway. And hey, we also make rum or aguardiente. Let's put some on the plane and
Sweet.
Hell yeah.
bring you the party supplies.
Yeah.
So I can just imagine, like, literally, like in a village, no internet, no roads. Like, well, probably in the 70s, in some of these remote places, it was probably a very rare occurrence to even leave the village, period. So to have like a plane show up some 3 days before the patron saint festival, like from someone,
Full of rum.
yeah, full of rum, you know what I mean? And like, just like at Jubilee, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
more happiness than that.
One thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, I know mezcal, agave spirits have come up a lot on, during this conversation. And I think one of the things that just naturally we tend to do in conversations like this is talk about the rum category, the future of it and everything. And I think you've had kind of a ground floor viewing of the massive growth in agave spirits over the last decade or so. And I'm curious if it sounds so lame to call these lessons, but like, are there any takeaways, positive or negative, that you think the rum category can learn from the growth of agave spirits that's happened in recent years?
I mean, I think I'm not in a position, I think, to really talk about the rum industry in general because I'm still so new to it. There's a lot of places that I still want to visit and learn. And, I grabbed Matt Petrick's book and I dig through it and I read and it's like, I'm fascinated by the category, but by no means I think I can talk about the industry in general. I will just say that, I mean, for me and from coming from the mezcal space specifically,
Yeah.
something a little scary in our category is like, I think a lot of people in the game, if you will, these days, people who are flying in and trying to start brands, and capitalize on something that's become a bit trendy and popular. The
Yeah.
environmental impact that they're leaving behind. I don't think a lot of people understand how the goal to create tons and tons of cheap, almost always espadín, to make a spirit that's crafted for the well is literally destroying ecosystems. So a lot of places, unfortunately, in Oaxaca aren't very well protected from a federal level. And there are definitely villages that have, that have names that have more or less said, we'll cut down community land where, our endemic animal species live, bird species live, and to grow more espadín so we can feed.
For scale.
Yeah, for it to scale up, and you look at the amount of like land that's used to create a liter of mezcal, and when you look at the amount of like raw material that's required, it's 4 or 5 times higher than for something comparable for us to make cañada specifically. So we go, oh wow, like over a 10-year period, we would, from the same amount of land, we would make 5 times the amount of liquid of cañada as we would from espadín there specifically. And I mean, that's also a very empirical thing because we're thinking about growing without the use of accelerants or chemicals. I'm sure, some people could be able to milk the yield even more. They're actually growing cane on a flat surface as opposed to the side of a mountain where you can't plant as densely. So I mean, I don't think rum has that risk, right? I mean, I don't know enough, but I'm not sure that people are wiping out forests to plant more cane fields. I hope not. I kind of imagine the sugar industry has maybe already done that. I don't know. Whereas because this is a growing industry, we're watching it happen in real time and go, woof.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that happen. It's part of the reason why we never really wanted to play in that space with our brand. It's not, I don't know. It's kind of a sad note. You said something about fun earlier, and get there. We're like, hey, we're wrap up. Let's have a fun note here, John. And it's like, maybe the other way to look at it is this. It's like, I think if people in general are in the spirits industry and they're listening to this, and their goal or dream or vision is to have a spirits brand that is in the cocktail space, frankly, like, look elsewhere. Look at different categories. Because it has a serious ecological impact. And I say that here when it's 98 degrees today, and it has been for the last month, and Oaxaca's going through tons and tons of forest fires, and it's almost a direct relationship with the clearing of forests and to have monocrop fields of agave espadín. And it's a sad thing to see.
I think that's all super important, and I'm glad we brought it up. But we will chase the sobering cold dose of reality with a tradition on the Rumcast that is fun and lighthearted, which is the rapid fire round, masterminded by my co-host John Gulla, which, as a listener of the show, I'm sure that you're somewhat familiar with if you've made it to the end of the episodes before. So, John, I'll let you introduce the segment and take it from there.
All right, so Jason, we're going to give 60 seconds on the clock. Will keep the time. We're going to go through a series of short answer questions for you. You're going to answer as many as you can, as quickly as you can, with whatever comes to mind. No wrong or right answers here. It's just how you want to play it. So that's what we do. You good for this? You down for it?
I'll be the first person to opt out. Let's go. Let's do it. Good.
Let's go.
Sorry. Absolutely.
All right, I've got 60 seconds and go.
All right, Jason, neat or on the rocks?
Neat.
Column, pot, Krassel, or blend?
You threw Krassel in there. Interesting. Pot.
Oh, interesting. I'm sure it was Krassel then pot. I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, aged or unaged?
Unaged with an asterisk.
Yeah, that's a tough one for you. I know.
He's thinking on it.
Yeah, this one might be a little less tough. Cane juice or molasses? Yeah. Okay. Alambique Serrano literally translates into mountain still, and it has zero to do with a Serrano chili. But of course, here in the U.S., I think that's the first thing that a lot of people come to mind for them. Would you ever consider doing a Serrano chili-infused product?
No.
Simply answered.
I figured that was going to be the answer. I was just wanted to see how you were going to state the answer. So, all right, very plain. Here we go. Your favorite mezcal brand after Cinco Sentidos.
Mezonte.
Okay. On your site, you have the single cask products listed 1, 2, 14, and then 20. Did you and your local staff drink all the barrels between 3 and 13 and 15 and 19, or are they stashed away somewhere to become lost casks?
we're gonna try never to lose a cask, but those are single casks that went to restaurants and bars that we just haven't put online, I guess, because our resources aren't large enough to be like, so-and-so got 20 barrels of cases of this.
I figured there was a logistical reason behind it that was more compelling. Okay. What's your favorite mixed drink with Cañada?
Believe it or not, a Cañada Negroni slaps pretty hard.
Ooh, that actually sounds pretty interesting.
Might actually convert John to Campari.
Maybe. We'll see. Well, you never know. If you mix it with maple syrup, could you call it an O Cañada?
I'll let someone else.
Just like, hell no. I'm trying to get away from that. I read on your website that you transport the cut cane by horse, some by donkey, and some by mule. Is it true that the horse is used exclusively for the stainless steel batches, the donkey is used exclusively for the pine wood batches, and the mule, of course, is exclusively for the blends?
How do you know? That part of the website live too.
I just had a feeling, I thought, I want to make sure you guys are tracking that, and that's yet another variable that you can isolate. All right, and finally here, as the clock winds down, you have 3 generations of the Krassel family you're working with. How close are we to a 4th generation distiller?
I think a good 10 years still.
But it could happen.
Oh yeah, no, it'll happen. Yes, the Krassel juniors are on the way right now. They're at the distillery, they're learning and they're seeing. So yeah, there's definitely a succession plan in place.
We blew through time long ago, but that's why we love the generous 60-second time limit on the Rumcast.
Hey, remember, do you sound the buzzer after the 60 seconds or not? I was anxious.
No, we sound the buzzer after the end of the segment, which is always longer than 60 seconds. So
I've just been like, oh, they're gonna hit the buzzer any second now.
We create the illusion. It's the illusion of time pressure, but when you're actually, you know how the sausage is made now. Jason, this was super fun. I'm really excited for people to hear this, and I mean, we're excited to talk to Isidoro as well. I feel like we're gonna get a whole nother perspective on Alambique Serrano and Cañada and everything. So thank you for coming on the show. And is there anything we didn't get to? Any upcoming products that we didn't accidentally reveal that you want to share with the world?
I mean, this is the one that's on the way and has a name right now. It's Cartier 30, and it's exciting. I think I'm really excited to see how the our niche of rum drinkers react to it, and hopefully they appreciate it. And just for me, I don't know when this stuff is going to get somewhere, but I finally started finishing things, which is really exciting for me too. To be like, oh, we got some new Hungarian oak, X wine, and we've got some acacia stuff that we're starting to just do finishing in after initial aging, which is a new for the brand. I'm not sure we'll make another confusing label or limited another label that departs from the rest. But right now it's been real to taste those and see how they advance. So they'll go somewhere someday.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that, and the Cartier 30, of course. And yeah, just thanks again for stopping by the show.
Thanks for your time, guys. Looking forward to being on the line again with Isidoro in the near future.
At the end, we want to leave you with Isidoro's final thoughts from our interview that really encapsulate just how special the distillate that ends up in the bottle really is.
Toda esta cuestión, ¿no? De los destilados, porque es una región, es la parte alta, la Cañada y parte del Azteca, que son como que
these products and these are really also, they're part of a regional context, right? I mean, there's something that are also unique from where we're at. So it's part of the Cañada region, kind of like at the base of like the mountain Sierra Mazateca, having your cane, which is Java cane, grow on the side of a hill, essentially with the minerals that we have in our soil. And also, thinking of a Java or Java cane, I mean, this is something that this is 100 years ago, this variety was Java, and it really was from Indonesia. But nowadays, the Java we have there, the Java there is adapted where it's at. And it's really, we call it Java, but it's Java de Talistac. It's a different, this variety now is adapted to where we're at. So thinking that just everything that we're making here is really influenced by where it's coming from. Part of the reason why the flavors that we are able to create, are kind of unique and irrepeatable in other places as well.
A distiller from Germany, sugarcane from Indonesia, over a century later, giving something uniquely Oaxacan that still isn't done evolving. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Igual, un gusto conocerlos bueno, estoy muy emocionado de nunca vi las caras que...
Same thing. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure for him and for me both to participate with you guys. And also, you said, I could tell just on the looks of your face that you guys like it. You're excited about it. So that's satisfying to know that the people are enjoying our work.
All right, everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Rumcast. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about what they're doing at Alambique Serrano and Cañada, we'll put some links in the show notes to their website. John, I love a good producer website, and their websites are really great in terms of information, photos, so highly recommend checking those out as an educational resource. And if you would like to get more Rumcast, you can check us out on Patreon. That's patreon.com/the Rumcast. We're doing bonus episodes, happy hours, all types of bonus content. And you know what? We'd love to hear your reactions as well to Alambique Serrano, Cañada, Oaxacan rum, all that stuff. Send us an email, host@rumcast.com. That's HOST@rumcast.com. Or you can find us on social media. John, where can they find us?
You can find us at The Rumcast. That is the definite article, at The Rumcast on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, any of those formats, and we will interact with you there, or just leave a comment, and other people will interact too. It's the funnest thing ever. We've got this rum community. We've got rum family out there that all want to talk about this stuff together, so, use it. Make
the wonder
comment,
of the internet.
Yeah, talk about these different Alambique Serrano products that are coming out that are so wildly interesting and different, and even the labels, right? For once, Will, we do agree. We agree on these. They're
it's
nice
in our
bottles.
Venn diagram. Yeah, we love the Alambique label design. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. So leave us some stuff there, or if you want to DM us through that format, you can do that also. And YouTube, let's not forget about YouTube. Will, every day I'm seeing more and more people that are starting to join up on the YouTube. We're starting to sprinkle in some video content here and there, and so that platform clearly is starting to take off a little bit more. Or you can just listen to the audio there too. It's an easy format to find it. So
We're trying to be anywhere and everywhere, John. We're just all over the place. We're growing like weeds all over the digital ecosystem. So anyway, let us know what you think of the episode, what you think of the rum, and we will be back soon with another episode. So until then, cheers.
Cheers.